This is a story of Emeka, an innocent student who gained admission into the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, in 2002. Bullied and pressured by Black Axe members to join their confraternity, he refused and instead sought protection with the Buccaneers. His choice sparked clashes and years of tension between both groups, but with resilience and determination, Emeka endured under Buccaneers' protection until graduation. The year was 2002, and the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, popularly known as UNN, was buzzing with life. The campus had its signature blend of intellectual energy, youthful ambition, and the unseen shadows that haunted many Nigerian universities in the early 2000s. For countless young men and women, admission into UNN was more than an academic achievement. It was a doorway to dreams, freedom, and self-discovery. But for others, it was also an unspoken initiation into a battle of survival, a world where academic pursuit collided with the harsh reality of cultism. Amid this reality walked Emeka, a young boy full of hope and innocence. Born and raised in Enugu State, Emeka came from a humble but disciplined family. His father was a civil servant, a man who valued education above all else, and his mother was a schoolteacher, strict yet nurturing. They had raised him with principles of hard work, honesty, and resilience. From secondary school days, Emeka had been known as a quiet, intelligent student who avoided trouble. His dream had always been clear: to study political science at UNN, graduate with good grades, and eventually become a voice for justice in Nigeria. For him, admission into UNN in 2002 was the culmination of years of hard work and endless prayers. His family celebrated his admission like a national victory. His father spoke of the great opportunities that awaited him, and his mother warned him sternly against the distractions of university life. They both knew the stories, tales of students drawn into dangerous lifestyles on campus, but like most parents, they hoped their son's discipline would shield him. When Emeka arrived at Nsukka to begin his first year, he was overwhelmed by the new world before him. The lecture halls were filled with hundreds of students from different parts of the country, each with their own dreams, accents, and ambitions. The hostels buzzed with life, young men playing loud music, arguing about football, or gathering in corners whispering about politics, nightlife, or hidden campus matters. To Emeka, everything felt new and exciting. He was a true freshman, what older students mockingly called a jambite. In those first weeks, he focused strictly on his academics. He carried his lecture notes everywhere, sat in the front rows during classes, and avoided distractions. But in the background, a darker current was already swirling around him. At UNN in the early 2000s, the presence of confraternities, what many referred to as cult groups, was not a secret. They moved silently yet powerfully, marking territories and hostels, organizing themselves in secrecy, but also flexing their power in ways that everyone felt. Black Axe, the Buccaneers, Vikings, Lord, and a few others had spread their roots deep into the university system. Students whispered about them in hostels, lecturers knew better than to confront them, and parents prayed their children would never cross paths with them. Unfortunately for Emeka, he did not remain invisible for long. His quiet nature and refusal to engage in the loud, reckless lifestyle of some of his peers made him stand out. He was intelligent, carried himself with dignity, and had an air of determination. To Black Axe members on campus, that made him a target. For them, recruitment was everything. Fresh blood meant new soldiers, new strength, and future continuity of their organization. They often set their sights on young men like Emeka, innocent, principled, and full of potential, because breaking such individuals was seen as a prize. It started with subtle approaches. A friendly older student offered to show him around campus. Another invited him to a small gathering in the hostel. But Emeka, cautious by nature, politely declined. He wasn't there for parties or nocturnal meetings. He wanted to study, pass his exams, and make his parents proud. When the friendly gestures didn't work, the tone began to change. Black Axe members started mocking him openly. They called him amateur, a novice, who didn't understand how campus life worked. At first, Emeka tried to ignore them. But ignoring cult members was easier said than done. Their presence was intimidating, and their influence stretched wide. Some of his roommates warned him, "Guy, just be careful. Those people don't like person that is forming I holy pass." The pressure mounted daily. Sometimes he would return from lectures to find his belongings scattered on the floor. Other times, he was pushed around in the hostel corridors for no reason. He was being tested, mocked into submission. The message was clear: join us or face endless intimidation. For Emeka, the situation became a nightmare. He had never been a fighter. He wasn't physically strong, nor did he have the street-smart bravado that some other students carried. Alone, vulnerable, and far from home, he began to feel trapped. His parents had warned him, but they had no idea how suffocating the pressure could be. By the end of his first semester, Emeka had already become a marked man in the eyes of Black Axe. His refusal to yield made them see him as stubborn, a challenge to be broken. And in the dangerous world of cultism, being singled out by Black Axe was a perilous position to be in. By the second semester of his 100 level, Emeka's life at UNN had shifted from excitement to survival. What should have been a period of self-discovery and academic growth had turned into a relentless cycle of fear and uncertainty. The Black Axe members were no longer trying to be subtle. Their intimidation had become direct. The university atmosphere in 2000s was one of dual realities. On the surface, students thrived in academics, cultural nights, debates, and sporting events. The administration projected the image of discipline and learning. Yet beneath this surface lay the undercurrent of cult activities. It was like a shadow government, silent but powerful, feared by all. Most students learned quickly how to navigate both worlds: avoid stepping on the wrong toes, mind your business, and stay invisible. Emeka, however, had already been noticed. His refusal to associate with the Black Axe marked him as different. His commitment to academics was interpreted as arrogance by those who wanted him under their wing. And in the cruel psychology of cult recruitment, someone who resisted was not just a potential recruit, they became a target. The bullying was not always loud or violent. Sometimes it was psychological. They would deliberately occupy his favorite seat in lecture halls, forcing him to the back. In the hostel, his clothes would mysteriously go missing, only to reappear days later in strange places. Whispered insults followed him wherever he went. Novice, amateur. At night, Emeka dreaded walking alone. The pathways between the hostels and lecture halls were often dimly lit, and it was common knowledge that cult members used such spots to intimidate or abduct students they wanted to pressure. More than once, he felt footsteps behind him and quickened his pace, his heart pounding until he reached safety. The worst was the isolation. Many of his classmates began to avoid him, not because they disliked him, but because they feared the consequences of associating with someone marked by the Black Axe. If Emeka was in the hostel room, conversations often fell silent. People who had once chatted with him now kept their distance. He was being cornered into loneliness, another tactic of intimidation. One particular evening cemented his fear. He had stayed late in the library, determined to prepare for an upcoming test. As he walked back to the hostel, 3 figures emerged from the shadows. Their faces were hard to see, but their voices carried the familiar mocking tone. "Novice, where you day run go? You day form too much," one of them said, stepping closer. They shoved him against the wall, demanding he follow them to a meeting. Emeka knew exactly what that meant. It was the beginning of initiation, a road he did not want to travel. Summoning courage he didn't know he had, he shook his head and muttered, "I no day interested." The response was a slap so sharp it made his ears ring. They laughed as he stumbled, warning him that he wouldn't survive long without choosing a side. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they disappeared into the night, leaving him trembling, his books scattered on the ground. That night, Emeka lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his hostel room. Fear gnawed at him. He thought about his parents, how proud they had been, how much they sacrificed for his education. He thought about his dreams of becoming a lawyer or activist. Was all of that about to be crushed by forces beyond his control? He knew he couldn't continue like this. If he resisted Black Axe much longer, they would break him. If he joined them, he would lose himself. The weight of the decision pressed down heavily. It was around this time that another path quietly opened before him. The Buccaneers, another confraternity on campus, had noticed his situation. Unlike Black Axe, who had tried to coerce him, the Buccaneers approached differently. A student from his department, someone he respected, called him aside one afternoon. "Emeka, I see what you see face," the course mate said. "You no fit stand those boys alone. For this campus, it is only a man that has backup behind survives." The words stayed with him. For weeks, Emeka wrestled with his conscience. He did not want to join any group. He had sworn to himself and to his parents that he would stay clear of cults. But reality was harsh. Neutrality was not an option. Refusing Black Axe had already marked him. His only real chance of survival was protection, and that protection could only come from aligning with another force. The Buccaneers presented themselves as that force. They promised brotherhood, protection, and dignity. They painted themselves as defenders, the ones who stood against oppression from other groups. Whether or not this was true didn't matter at that moment. What mattered was that Emeka saw them as a shield against the storm. By the end of his 100 level, Emeka made the decision that would define his university years. He agreed to join the Buccaneers. It was not out of desire, not out of ideology, but out of survival. He needed protection, and he needed to breathe without fear of being cornered every night. The initiation process was intense, a test of loyalty and endurance, but Emeka endured it. When it was over, he bore the mark of a Buccaneer, not on his skin, but in his new identity on campus. He was no longer the novice, the isolated bookworm. He now had brothers who would stand by him. Yet with that protection came a heavy price. The clash between Buccaneers and Black Axe was inevitable. And now, Emeka was right at the center of it. When the Black Axe members discovered that Emeka had joined the Buccaneers, it was as if a matchstick had been thrown into dry grass. The tension that had been simmering silently suddenly caught fire. In the world of campus cultism, betrayal, or even the perception of betrayal, was a dangerous crime. To Black Axe, Emeka's refusal to join them had already been an insult. But for him to go further and align himself with the Buccaneers was a direct provocation. It was like choosing sides in a conflict. And in their eyes, Emeka had chosen the enemy. The news spread quickly, as it always did on campus. Rumors traveled faster than official announcements, whispered from one hostel room to another, until the whole university seemed to know. "Have you heard? That novice Black Axe Day disturb, the boy Don enter Buccaneer." "For real? Ah, trouble Don Gasso." By the time Emeka returned to campus for his second year, he could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Where once the intimidation had been about recruitment, now it was about punishment. Black Axe members no longer mocked him. They stared at him with cold hostility. Their laughter when he passed was not amusement anymore. It was the chilling laughter of men planning vengeance. Emeka, however, was no longer the same defenseless freshman. He now had the Buccaneers behind him. Wherever he went, at least one or two of his new brothers were nearby. It wasn't always obvious, but it was enough to deter open attacks. He was still afraid deep inside, but for the first time in months, he felt a layer of protection. The relationship between Black Axe and Buccaneers had always been rocky, rooted in long histories of rivalry that stretched beyond UNN to campuses across Nigeria. But Emeka's case added fuel to an already smoldering fire. It began with minor confrontations. A Buccaneer student would be blocked from entering a hostel where Black Axe members dominated. A Black Axe member would be shouted down at a departmental meeting where Buccaneers were present. These confrontations quickly escalated into heated arguments, then physical fights. One particular night in 2000s, just outside an hostel, the tension exploded. A group of Buccaneers, including Emeka, had gathered after lectures. Black Axe members approached, their numbers slightly larger, their presence intimidating. Words were exchanged, accusations, insults, threats. "You dey hide this your amateur inside Buccaneer? It will not save him," one of the Black Axe members spat. Before anyone could stop it, fists flew. The fight was intense, chaotic, and loud enough to attract other students who scattered in fear. Though the university security intervened, the message was clear. This was not a dispute that could be calmed with words. A line had been drawn in blood and bruises. From that point onward, Emeka lived under constant protection. The Buccaneers ensured that he was never completely alone, especially at night. They had their own system of watchfulness, their own ways of moving in silence across campus. To be under their wing was to carry both privilege and burden. On one hand, no Black Axe member could touch him directly without risking an all-out war. On the other hand, Emeka's movements were now restricted. He couldn't go anywhere freely. Every step he took was shadowed by tension, and he understood that his personal decision had become part of a larger battle. There were days when he regretted everything. He would sit quietly in lecture halls, watching other students laugh freely, join clubs, attend parties, and live ordinary campus lives. He envied them. His own life had become a constant calculation. Which route is safe? Who is watching me? Can I trust this person? The most disheartening part was the silence of the institution itself. Lecturers knew what was happening, administrators heard the whispers, and even security officers were not blind to the tension. Yet nothing was done. Cultism had become too entrenched, too dangerous to confront directly. The university, like many others across the country, chose to look the other way unless violence spilled out too publicly. This silence emboldened the groups. Black Axe members continued to scheme, Buccaneers continued to guard, and Emeka remained the unwilling symbol of the conflict. He never asked for this role, but circumstances had placed him at its center. One night in 2000s, Emeka faced his closest brush with execution. He had left a group discussion in the Faculty of Social Sciences when he noticed two figures tailing him. They weren't Buccaneers. He quickened his pace, his heart racing. The footsteps followed. Just as panic set in, two Buccaneers appeared from a corner, their presence enough to make the shadows retreat. That night, Emeka realized fully what his life had become. Without the Buccaneers, he would not survive. They were not just protection, they were his shield against certain destruction. But that shield came with a price, and Emeka would carry that price until his graduation. By the time Emeka settled into his second year, the uneasy truce between Buccaneers and Black Axe had completely collapsed. His decision to seek protection under the Buccaneers was no longer just a personal matter. It had become a symbol of defiance that stirred both groups into direct confrontation. The university atmosphere changed drastically. Students who once moved freely between lecture halls and hostels now measured their steps carefully. Everyone knew something dangerous was brewing. For those outside cult life, survival meant staying invisible, avoiding late nights, and steering clear of certain areas on campus. For Emeka, survival meant something else entirely: navigating a war zone. The first full-scale confrontation between Black Axe and the Buccaneers that Emeka witnessed took place near the Faculty of Arts Quadrangle. It was supposed to be an ordinary Friday afternoon, with students pouring out of lecture halls, exchanging notes, and heading for weekend plans. Then it happened. A group of Black Axe members spotted two Buccaneers hanging around the quadrangle. Words were exchanged, sharp, biting, and loud enough to draw attention. Before anyone could blink, punches were thrown. The Buccaneers fought back with equal force, and within minutes, both groups had called in reinforcements. The quadrangle erupted into chaos. Students screamed and scattered, dropping bags and books as they fled. Chairs from nearby classrooms were turned into weapons. Bottles smashed against walls. The air filled with the sound of fists, shouts, and the raw violence of young men locked in bitter rivalry. Emeka, standing at a distance with two Buccaneers, watched in frozen terror. It was his first time witnessing the full rage of a cult clash. Though he was not directly involved in the fight, he understood the reality. This was part of the price he now paid for protection. By the time campus security arrived, the quadrangle was littered with broken glass and the silence of fear. Officially, the university downplayed the incident, calling it a student misunderstanding. But everyone on campus knew better. This was conflict, and it was far from over. For Emeka, life became more complicated. He was not a fighter by nature. He had joined the Buccaneers only to survive, not to wage battles. Yet as tensions rose, his presence among them tied him to their struggles. When Black Axe members passed him in lecture halls, their eyes burned with unspoken threats. Some of his old classmates who once admired his seriousness now whispered behind his back. To them, he was no longer just Emeka the novice. He was that Buccaneer boy. His identity had shifted, whether he liked it or not. There were days he wanted to quit everything, withdraw from the university, and escape back to his parents' home. But he knew what that would mean: failure, shame, and the possibility that Black Axe could still hunt him down outside campus. The only path forward was through, and so he clung to his new brothers for survival. The Buccaneers tightened their protection around him. They rarely let him move alone, especially at night. Meetings were held where his name was mentioned directly. That boy must not be touched. If Black Axe want him, them go see us first. Their commitment to shielding him gave Emeka some measure of safety, but it also deepened the rivalry. Black Axe saw his protection as a challenge, a taunt that demanded a response. It was no longer just about Emeka. It was about pride, dominance, and territory. For ordinary students, the clashes were like storms that came without warning. They could be sitting in class one moment and running for safety the next. By 2000s, the fear of cult violence was etched into everyday campus life. Hostels developed reputations. Certain blocks were dominated by Buccaneers, others by Black Axe. Students avoided walking alone at night, and whispers of "something go happen" were enough to empty lecture halls early. The tension became part of the campus rhythm, an unspoken reality everyone adjusted to. Emeka often wondered what outsiders would think if they saw the double life of UNN. To his parents, the campus was a center of learning. To him, it had become a battlefield where books and bullets coexisted in uneasy silence. The most dangerous incident came one rainy night. Rumors had circulated all week that Black Axe was planning retaliation for a fight they claimed the Buccaneers started. Emeka dismissed it as talk, until that night. He was in his hostel room when shouts erupted outside. A group of Black Axe members had stormed the area, hunting for Buccaneers. Doors slammed shut as students hid inside, peeking through cracks in fear. The Buccaneers responded quickly, their members flooding out to defend their ground. What followed was chaos: shouts, fists, and the sound of objects smashing against walls. Emeka stayed hidden, his heart pounding as he listened to the clash unfold just meters away. When it was over, the hostel bore scars of the violence: broken windows, red stains on the corridor, and the eerie silence of a night that reminded everyone how fragile their safety truly was. For Emeka, it was the ultimate confirmation. He was trapped in a world where escape was no longer possible. The university administration responded with the usual tactics: extra security patrols, curfews, and warnings against indiscipline. But nothing touched the root of the problem. Cultism was too deep, too organized, and too connected to be dismantled overnight. Students returned to their routines, pretending life was normal, but everyone walked with a heightened sense of caution. For Emeka, the clashes had etched fear deeper into his bones. He was alive, yes, but every day felt like walking on a thin rope stretched over fire. By the end of his second year, Emeka had fully accepted the reality. He was under Buccaneer protection, and that meant he was part of their struggle. The choice he made out of fear had become his identity. And while it kept him alive, it also chained him to a destiny he never wanted. By the time Emeka entered his third year, the shape of his university journey had been permanently altered. He was no longer the innocent freshman who clutched his notebooks tightly and rushed to lectures with wide-eyed excitement. Life on campus had carved him into someone different. More cautious, more aware of shadows, and less naive about the dangers that lurked behind every corner of UNN. The Buccaneers had taken him in, not just as a recruit but as someone worth defending. His story, the mocked boy who resisted Black Axe and sought protection, had become a sort of legend within their circles. For them, he symbolized defiance against a rival group. Protecting him wasn't just about loyalty, it was about pride. This shield came with its own rhythm. Wherever Emeka went, Buccaneers weren't far behind. He rarely walked alone across campus, especially at night. Study sessions, hostel visits, even trips to the cafeteria were often accompanied by the quiet presence of brothers who blended into the background but were always alert. To outsiders, this looked like privilege. Many students whispered about how the Buccaneers' day guard that boy. But to Emeka, it was both a relief and a prison. He was grateful for the protection, yet he longed for the freedom to walk across campus without fear. Life under Buccaneer protection was not only about safety, it was about assimilation. Emeka began to absorb their codes, language, and mannerisms. They had handshakes only insiders understood, songs that echoed their brotherhood, and rituals that reminded each member of loyalty. At first, Emeka resisted fully embracing these codes. He reminded himself daily, "I didn't join because I wanted to. I joined because I had no choice." But over time, survival required him to blend in. Using the codes became second nature, attending meetings became routine, and understanding the group's unwritten rules became part of his education. He noticed how the Buccaneers valued loyalty above all else. A brother's problem was everyone's problem, and betrayal was the greatest sin. This culture of solidarity strengthened his sense of belonging, even though deep down he never forgot that his entry into the brotherhood was born of fear, not desire. Slowly, Emeka began to change. He was no longer the timid boy who trembled when mocked. The constant pressure of survival hardened him. His voice became firmer, his eyes sharper, his body language more confident. Some of his classmates noticed the transformation. Those who had once pitied him now regarded him with a mix of respect and caution. They knew better than to mock him. He was no longer the novice or amateur who had been pushed around. He was a Buccaneer, and that came with consequences. This transformation wasn't complete acceptance, it was adaptation. Emeka still focused on his academics, burying himself in books whenever he could. But even in the classroom, he carried the awareness of his dual life, the student striving for grades and the cult-protected young man surviving a dangerous system. With protection came expectations. Buccaneers expected him to stand with them during tense moments, to attend meetings, to play his role in the larger brotherhood. While he wasn't pushed into violent confrontations, his presence at strategic moments mattered. One night, he was asked to stand guard with other members near the hostel after rumors spread that Black Axe planned retaliation. Emeka's heart raced the entire time. He wasn't a fighter, but the symbolic act of standing with them was enough. He realized that while the Buccaneers shielded him, they also required him to be part of their identity. The broader campus environment reflected his internal struggle. Ordinary students lived in constant fear of cult clashes. They avoided certain areas at night, skipped events that could turn violent, and whispered stories of attacks that spread like wildfire. For Emeka, this fear was magnified. He wasn't just an observer, he was part of the system creating it. Though he hated the violence, he couldn't escape the reality that his name was tied to the rivalry. If the Buccaneers fought, he was implicated. If Black Axe attacked, he was a target. The university's silence continued. Administrators issued circulars about discipline. Security men patrolled visibly during daylight, but at night the shadows ruled. Everyone knew that true power on campus didn't rest in offices. It rested in the hands of those who controlled fear. At night, lying on his hostel bed, Emeka often thought about the boy he had been in 2002. That boy had come to UNN with dreams of studying, excelling, and making his family proud. Now, only 3 years later, he was entangled in a world that seemed impossible to escape. He asked himself hard questions. Had he made the right choice by joining the Buccaneers? Would he have survived if he had remained neutral? Was he still the same Emeka his parents believed in, or had the system reshaped him completely? The answers were never clear. What was clear, however, was that his reality was no longer one of innocence. He was part of something much bigger than himself, and whether he liked it or not, his survival depended on it. By the end of his 3rd year, Emeka's reputation had shifted. He was no longer the easy target of bullies. He was recognized as someone under the Buccaneers' wing, someone whose survival had come at a price. In his own way, he had become a hardened survivor, not through violence, but through endurance. He had learned how to walk carefully, how to read silences, how to anticipate danger before it struck. These lessons weren't taught in lecture halls, but they became as important as any textbook. And as he prepared to step into his final years at UNN, Emeka knew one truth clearly. His life would never again be ordinary. The Black Axe had traditionally seen themselves as dominant on campus, and their intimidation of fresh students was one of their ways of maintaining that dominance. But Emeka's choice undermined this control. He represented resistance, and worse, he had chosen to align with a rival. The Buccaneers, known for their tight-knit structure and protective loyalty, stood firmly by him. They made it clear that Emeka was now under their protection, and any harm done to him would be interpreted as an attack on the entire group. This shifted the dynamics significantly. The Black Axe could no longer threaten Emeka directly without triggering violent confrontations with the Buccaneers. For a while, there was a tense silence, but everyone knew it was the silence before a storm. For non-members, the situation added an extra layer of fear to daily life. Students avoided being caught in large gatherings at night. They were careful about friendships, fearful of being suspected as allies of one group or another. Lecturers, too, although they rarely acknowledged it openly, understood that the air on campus was thick with unseen battles. For Emeka, it was surreal. He had not chosen the Buccaneers for glory or power, only for survival. Yet his choice had turned him into a symbol. His mere presence in a lecture hall reminded students that unseen conflict were being waged around them. The first open confrontation came not long after. One evening, while Emeka was walking to his hostel after a late study session, a group of Black Axe members blocked his path. Before the situation could escalate, 3 Buccaneers appeared from the shadows, standing silently behind him. The standoff was brief but intense. Words were exchanged, sharp, loaded words that hinted at battles past and battles to come. The confrontation ended without violence that night, but the message was clear. Emeka's decision had turned him into a frontline figure in a wider conflict. The Buccaneers had made it clear that they were willing to defend him, and the Black Axe had made it equally clear that they would not forget the insult. The University of Nigeria Nsukka in 2002 to 2003 was a place of both brilliance and shadows. By day, students rushed to lectures, queued at the library, and filled the dining halls with chatter. By night, however, The air was thick with unspoken fear. Behind the laughter of undergraduates, behind the echoes of generators and hostels, there was the awareness that cult groups were watching, planning, and acting. Emeka's refusal to bow to the Black Axe and his eventual protection under the Buccaneers became more than a personal issue. It marked a turning point that unsettled the delicate balance of power on campus. For years, the Black Axe had enjoyed unchecked influence, particularly over new students who were easy targets for intimidation. Emeka's defiance showed that their grip was not absolute. His decision emboldened some students who quietly admired his courage, yet it also made others fearful. They saw him as a lightning rod, someone whose presence attracted danger. Friends began to keep their distance, not out of hatred, but out of fear of being caught in the crossfire. The tension did not immediately erupt into bloodshed, but there were constant signs of unrest. Hostel corridors were marked with strange graffiti, symbols that outsiders might ignore but which carried clear warnings for those in the know. Whispers spread of secret meetings being held at the edges of campus, where members of the Black Axe debated how to handle the insult. Buccaneers, meanwhile, became more visible, walking in small but confident groups, making sure everyone understood that Emeka was untouchable under their guard. Students who once stayed out late in recreational centers now rushed back before nightfall. Even lecturers adjusted their schedules, making sure late classes ended earlier than usual. For Emeka, life was a strange blend of relief and unease. The Buccaneers shielded him, but protection came at a cost. He had become a symbol in a conflict that wasn't his to start. Every movement he made was shadowed by his new brothers. He couldn't visit the library without someone keeping watch. He couldn't walk across campus alone at night without eyes following. Though he was safer from physical harm, the psychological burden was immense. His academics began to suffer. He struggled to focus on lectures, always alert to sudden movements, always scanning his surroundings. In moments of solitude, he often asked himself if joining the Buccaneers was truly the best choice, or if he had simply traded one form of captivity for another. It didn't take long before the rivalry flared into visible clashes. At first, these were minor confrontations, heated arguments in the dining hall, threatening songs echoing in the night, members shadowing each other around campus. But soon, physical fights broke out. A Buccaneer and a Black Axe member fought near a lecture hall one afternoon, sending shockwaves through the student community. Weeks later, a late-night party in one of the hostels turned violent when Black Axe members attempted to confront Emeka directly, only to be intercepted by Buccaneers. Each skirmish was small, but together they created an atmosphere of constant fear. The university authorities were aware of the situation, but like in many Nigerian universities at the time, they walked a careful line. Expelling cult members often resulted in retaliatory violence, while ignoring their actions endangered the larger student body. Administrators adopted a policy of silence, pretending not to see what everyone else whispered about. This silence left students vulnerable. For Emeka, it was a bitter realization. The institution that should have protected him was powerless, or unwilling, to act. His survival rested entirely on the Buccaneers, and that meant his life was no longer his own. Once Emeka was officially under the Buccaneers' wing, his life on campus was never the same again. What had begun as an act of desperation to escape intimidation turned into a permanent arrangement that defined his entire stay at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. The Buccaneers were known for their strong sense of loyalty to their members. For Emeka, this meant he was rarely left alone. Whether he was walking to class, eating at the cafeteria, or studying in the library, there was always at least one Buccaneer nearby. Sometimes, they walked openly by his side. Other times, they lingered in the background, blending into the crowd but making sure he was safe. To outsiders, it seemed like Emeka had suddenly risen in status. Some students began to treat him with a mix of respect and caution. They greeted him carefully, avoided unnecessary jokes, and gave him space in crowded areas. But this so-called respect wasn't admiration, it was fear. people feared what being close to him could bring, and they feared what the Buccaneers might do if anyone disrespected him. With protection came responsibility. Though Emeka had never sought violence, he was now bound by the Buccaneers' code. He had to attend their gatherings, observe their rituals, and abide by their rules. His free will became limited. Even choices that seemed ordinary for other students, like attending a night party or visiting a friend in a different hostel, were no longer his to make without consideration. Every move carried risk. If he wandered into the wrong place, it could trigger a confrontation. If he ignored his brother's warnings, he could put himself and others in danger. The Buccaneers were not merely protecting him, they were molding him into one of their own. Academics became increasingly difficult. Emeka had entered UNN with the bright hope of excelling in his chosen field of study. He loved books, enjoyed debates, and dreamed of using his education to build a better future. But the constant tension drained his focus. While his course mates concentrated on assignments, Emeka was thinking about survival. There were days he skipped lectures because intelligence had reached the Buccaneers that Black Axe members were watching the hall. Other times, he left exams midway when sudden commotions outside made him fear a clash was near. His grades began to dip, not from laziness, but from living in constant anxiety. Ironically, Emeka's situation elevated him to a symbolic figure among his peers. To some, he represented resistance against Black Axe domination. To others, he was a cautionary tale about the dangers of cult entanglement. Either way, people spoke his name in whispers. Freshmen were warned, "Don't draw unnecessary attention. Look at what happened to Emeka." But within the Buccaneers, Emeka represented something else entirely. He was proof of their ability to protect and defend. His survival was a statement of their strength. As long as he remained unharmed, the Buccaneers' reputation remained intact. This turned him into more than just a member. He became an asset. Though grateful for their protection, Emeka often felt the heavy burden of loyalty. The Buccaneers were not merely a group of defenders. They were a brotherhood bound by secrecy and oaths. To walk away from them was impossible. To betray them was unthinkable. As Emeka advanced in his academic career, the nature of his struggles shifted. The first year had been defined by fear and intimidation. By 200 level, he had already adjusted to life under Buccaneers' watch, and while the fear never completely disappeared, it evolved into something else: acceptance. He was no longer just a boy caught in the middle of cult conflict. He had become a survivor, a young man hardened by experience, determined to finish what he started, his education. University life in Nigeria is often described as a period of self-discovery. For most of his classmates, this meant finding their passions, building friendships, and preparing for careers. For Emeka, it meant something much more sobering: learning how to live with danger, how to move carefully in a world where one wrong step could end a life. His second year was less chaotic than his first, not because the threats disappeared, but because the Buccaneers had grown more organized around him. They assigned him older brothers who acted as mentors, teaching him how to conduct himself, how to speak, and how to avoid unnecessary exposure. Through them, he learned the unspoken rules of survival on campus. Never walk alone at night. Never sit at the front of large gatherings unless instructed. Never argue loudly with strangers. You never know their affiliations. Always show loyalty, but never act recklessly. These lessons became second nature. By the end of 200 level, Emeka no longer looked like the innocent boy who had arrived at Nsukka in 2002. His eyes carried a sharpness born from vigilance, and his steps had a deliberate caution that set him apart. Despite the shadow of cultism, Emeka refused to let go of his dream of graduating. He poured his energy into academics whenever possible. Group discussions became his safe spaces, allowing him to blend into a crowd of serious students. His professors noticed his effort, though few dared to comment on the protective presence that often shadowed him. Exams were the hardest. Rumors often spread during exam periods about planned attacks or clashes. More than once, Emeka entered an exam hall to find security guards stationed outside, not for the sake of academics, but to keep rival groups from turning the place into a battleground. In those moments, he wrote quickly, his mind torn between solving questions and listening for footsteps outside. By 300 level, Emeka had gained a reputation. Students respected him but kept their distance. Emeka often found himself alone. He read in solitude, ate quietly, and when others spoke of parties or campus events, he listened but rarely participated. His life was no longer entirely his own. Though Emeka himself was never the direct victim of conflicts after joining the Buccaneers, he witnessed enough to understand the depth of the cult problem. During his later years, clashes between groups occasionally erupted into fights that left students hospitalized. He saw young men drop out of school because they could no longer handle the fear. He saw bright minds dimmed by the burden of survival. There were times when the violence spilled beyond campus, affecting surrounding communities. Shops would close early after rumors of clashes. Taxi drivers whispered warnings about avoiding certain roads at night. Cultism was not confined to the walls of the university. It was a shadow that touched everyone nearby. Yet through all this, Emeka endured. His resilience came from a deep determination to finish what he started. Each semester he survived was a victory. Each exam he passed a step closer to freedom. He clung to the hope of graduation, the dream that one day he would walk across the stage, collect his degree, and finally leave behind the world that had almost consumed him. By 400 level, Emeka was no longer simply a protected member. He had become a man of influence within the Buccaneers, not by choice, but by circumstance. His survival, his obedience, and his resilience had earned him respect. Younger members looked up to him as someone who had faced one of the fiercest groups on campus and lived to tell the tale. By the time Emeka entered his final year at the University of Nigeria Nsukka, the weight of his journey was heavy on his shoulders. 4 years of survival under constant pressure had changed him. He was no longer the wide-eyed boy who had arrived in 2002, full of dreams and innocence. He was a man molded by fear, loyalty, and the daily test of resilience. For Emeka, every semester that passed felt like crossing a battlefield. By 400 level, he knew graduation was within reach, but he also understood that the last lap was often the most dangerous. Many cult-related incidents in Nigerian universities occurred during final-year celebrations or send-off parties, where rival groups tried to settle old scores. Because of this, the Buccaneers doubled their watch over him. He rarely went anywhere alone, and his movements were carefully planned. Friends noticed that he was always in the company of at least 2 trusted brothers, even when attending lectures or visiting the library. While other students dreamed excitedly about graduation day, the photographs, the gowns, the celebration with family, Emeka carried a quiet fear. He worried that Black Axe, still bitter about his refusal years ago, might see his graduation as a last chance to strike. The memory of their threats never left him. He confided in a few close classmates that his only true dream was not the ceremony or the pictures, but walking away from UNN alive. For him, survival was the greatest victory. When the graduation season finally arrived, the campus was buzzing with joy. Families poured in from across Nigeria, filling Nsukka with proud parents, siblings, and friends. On that day, Emeka stood among his peers, wearing the same black gown and cap as everyone else. But inside, he carried a relief far greater than theirs. The Buccaneers made sure he was protected even during the ceremony. They positioned themselves strategically in the crowd, blending with other students and visitors, but their watchful eyes never left him. Every handshake, every congratulatory hug was monitored. Emeka's safety was their collective responsibility. When his name was called and he walked across the stage to collect his certificate, it wasn't just a degree he received, it was proof of survival. He had endured intimidation, lived through the shadow of constant clashes, and carried the burden of a decision he never truly wanted to make. The day he left Nsukka was the day he felt a deep breath of freedom. For the first time in years, he walked away from the campus without glancing over his shoulder. The town faded into the distance, along with the dark memories of midnight whispers, coded threats, and the graffiti of rival groups. Still, the scars of his experience would never completely disappear. Cultism had shaped his university years in ways he could never erase. But it had also forged in him a strength, a sharp awareness of life's fragility, and a determination to build a future beyond violence. Emeka's story became one of survival, but also of warning. For younger students who heard about his journey, it was a reminder of the dangers of cultism, the way it robs young people of peace, freedom, and innocence. His life showed that even when protection was found, it came with a heavy cost. Graduation for Emeka was not merely an academic milestone. It was his escape, his final release from the campus battles that had haunted him since 100 level. For him, stepping out of UNN with his degree in hand was more than success, it was freedom. Emeka's survival at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, was not just a personal victory. It was also a window into the larger issue of cultism that plagued Nigerian campuses in the early 2000s. His story shows not only how individuals were affected, but also how institutions, communities, and the entire academic environment bore the scars of cult activity. Emeka never planned to join a cult. His admission into UNN was fueled by ambition and hope. But his path was shaped by circumstances beyond his control. His decision to join the Buccaneers was not about power, wealth, or status. It was about survival. This is the reality for many students who fall into cultism. Some join willingly, seeking influence, protection, or a sense of belonging. Others, like Emeka, are forced by intimidation, bullying, or fear. The environment of insecurity pushes them to choose the lesser evil, aligning with one group to protect themselves from another. Cult groups exploit these vulnerabilities. They prey on the fears of freshmen, their desire for protection, or their longing to belong. In this way, cultism is not just a matter of choice, it is often a product of coercion. What cultism stole from Emeka was not just his innocence, but his freedom to fully enjoy his university years. His social life was limited, his academics disrupted, his friendships strained. He lived in constant vigilance, unable to relax in the way a student should. This is one of the hidden costs of cultism. Even those who survive, who graduate, carry with them years of anxiety and isolation. The joy of learning, of building youthful memories, is overshadowed by the shadow of violence. One of the most striking aspects of Emeka's journey was the silence of the institution. The administration at UNN, like many universities at the time, adopted a policy of avoidance. Expulsions or police interventions often escalated tensions, so many authorities chose to look the other way. But this silence empowered the cult groups. Students were left unprotected, forced to navigate dangers on their own. Emeka's decision to join the Buccaneers was a direct result of the administration's failure to provide security. His story highlights how the absence of strong institutional action creates space for cults to thrive. Cultism's impact did not end at the gates of UNN. Nsukka town itself felt the weight of the rivalries. Traders, taxi drivers, and ordinary residents adjusted their lives to the rhythm of the university's tensions. Shops closed early when rumors of clashes spread. Parents worried constantly for their children. Cultism on campus spilled over into the surrounding community, reminding everyone that the problem was not confined to students alone. It was a social issue, one that demanded broader solutions. Amidst all this darkness, Emeka's resilience shines through. He refused to let fear define him completely. He kept his focus on graduation, holding on to the dream that had brought him to UNN in the first place. His survival was not just luck, it was determination, discipline, and an unyielding belief that he could outlast the storm. His story underscores an important lesson. Even in the harshest circumstances, resilience, and focus can make survival possible. Emeka's experience offers a clear warning to younger generations. Cultism is not the answer. What may seem like protection or belonging comes with chains. What may appear to be power often leads to fear, isolation, and violence. For students entering universities, his story is a reminder to seek safety in academics, in friendships, in legitimate organizations, not in cults. For institutions, it is a call to take stronger action against the menace. For society, it is a lesson that the fight against cultism requires collective effort, not silence. When Emeka walked away from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, clutching his hard-earned degree, he carried with him more than a certificate. He carried the memories of years lived under pressure, the resilience born of survival, and the scars, both visible and invisible, left by the shadow of cultism. From the innocent boy who stepped onto the Nsukka campus in 2002, bullied and mocked by Black Axe members, to the hardened graduate who endured through the Buccaneers' protection, Emeka's story was one of transformation. He had faced fear daily, lived in the constant shadow of danger, and yet refused to break. He had entered the university with dreams of education and success, and despite the obstacles, he emerged with exactly that. His degree was not only proof of academic achievement but also a symbol of victory over intimidation, violence, and despair. Yet his survival came at a cost. Cultism had stolen much of his youth. While his peers made memories of carefree nights, parties, and laughter, Emeka lived a guarded existence. His freedom was limited, his friendships strained, his joy overshadowed. Even after graduation, the echoes of those years stayed with him. He knew that the trauma of living in fear would not simply vanish, it would shape the way he approached life forever. But scars, though painful, can also be reminders of strength. For Emeka, they were proof that he had endured what many could not. They were symbols of resilience, not defeat. Emeka's journey is not one to glorify cultism, but one to warn against it. His experience shows clearly that cultism offers no true safety. Joining the Buccaneers may have protected his life from immediate threats, but it also imprisoned him in rules and fears that robbed him of his freedom. Cultism may promise belonging, but it delivers chains. For students entering Nigerian universities, his story carries an urgent message. Resist intimidation, seek protection in legitimate ways, and understand that cult groups destroy more than they protect. For university authorities, it is a call to action, to create safer campuses where students do not have to choose between joining one group or becoming a victim of another. Though his time at UNN was scarred by danger, Emeka emerged with something no cult group could take away: his education, his resilience, and his future. His survival became an unspoken legacy, a story told among students as both a warning and a beacon. He proved that survival was possible, even in the harshest of environments. He proved that resilience could outlast intimidation. And he proved that, in the end, education was worth enduring for. Cultism remains one of the greatest threats to the Nigerian educational system. It destroys lives, shatters families, and poisons the atmosphere of learning. Emeka's story, however, reminds us that individuals can endure, resist, and rise above. His degree was not just an academic milestone. It was freedom. And his life stands as a testament that while cultism enslaves, education liberates.